So with biology, we said for her, oh, well, we didn't love that recession on that crown because the yellow didn't match the white on the cuspid, on her upper right cuspid. And remember, she had a bridge. And those were the only two biological concerns we had. But we still have to address them, don't we? And so we can look at the Panorex. You can use a Panorex if you want. You can say, oh, wow, look at that sinus in through there. And is there enough bone for the implant? And then we want to maybe go ahead and take a scan and really start to diagnose what would need to change in the biology to support the structure that we decided on. And in Shannon's particular case, we now said we need to go and change the biology to support the structure in that area. Well, but now we know exactly what we need to do to come back to this ugly model that we did. The models are ugly, but we know exactly what we need to do to support the aesthetics and the function and the structure that we've decided. And the cool thing is you can send these ugly models to the lab, like I did in this case, and I say, you know what, I've put the edges and the function right where I want them. I've got all my stops in the back where I want them. You preserve those and make those teeth look good for me because you're the guy that's got the great hands. So as you can see here, they duplicated my models, preserved all of my landing areas and functional cusp tips, and then filled in the rest to make the teeth look good. Now I can use this as a template to do the treatment. So the neat thing about this process is by waiting for biology, you can now, and taking a step back, you now understand what is needed to alter the biology, right? So what did you need to do for Shannon? Well, she needs a sinus lift and bone grafting in through there. You now understand what is needed to support the biology. Or if you can't, like if she had bisphosphonate therapy, you now understand the compromise of the E and the F and the S, don't you? Because you had to change the structure. And how is that going to, and so now you understand the compromise, and how does that affect the function if it does? And if it's front tooth, how does that affect the aesthetics? So who should be a part of this discussion when we get to biology? Oh my gosh, think about it. Your orthodontist for sure. Your endodontist told me that one tooth for the other patient wasn't, the root canal, even a retreat wasn't going to be very helpful. Your surgeon and your periodontist can start to tell you, you know what, I can move bone here, but I can't move bone there. Or I'm not sure this is going to work, and they're going to help you decide what you can do to support the E and the F and the S. And then who else should be involved, of course, is the patient, right? Patient needs to understand all the compromises. And when you go through E, F, S, and B, you now know all the compromises. You can have a different conversation with the patient. So now going through this, you now understand the techniques or the ways to do it to alter the biology and or the concerns that the other participants might not have appreciated, like the specialist or the patient. Or now you appreciate what could happen with the timing of the treatment. So we start to talk about implants, right? So when we get through biology, EFS and B with our specialist, man, now we get what could be done, things we never saw before. Or man, now I see something I would have never thought about before and I appreciate more what you do. And now we've talked about the timing of the treatment. I could put the implant in now and let it sit. Or do we want to wait until the end? Do I want to restore the implant? So all these things happen when we really trust this EFSB process. So with Shannon, what I had to do is I had to go ahead and remove her bridge so that David Bargett, the periodontist in this particular case, could come in and do a sinus lift and bone graft. So he did a phenomenal job because we knew exactly what we wanted ahead of time, and then we knew exactly where we wanted the implant based off of our models. So there was no surprise that the implant was placed in just the perfect spot for us. And then he actually took a little soft tissue from back behind the second molar, which helped my preparation, my margins. He sort of exposed more of that second molar that was totally covered back there and said, I can do this for you too. Again, I would have never thought of that. That's the beauty of sitting down and going over everything with the specialist. So at the end of the day of the sinus lift and bone grafting and a little soft tissue augmentation, there's no surprises. We knew exactly what we were going to do. So the implant was placed exactly where it needed to be placed for us, and we handled that part of the biology because we knew what the structure and function were going to be and the aesthetics. So now is actually time for the magic. I'm going to walk you through sort of the sequencing of the treatment because I want to finish this up with a discussion about sequencing. I'm going to go sort of quickly through this because you get the idea now. So it's time to roll. Well, we had our blueprint. We can use the blueprint in a lot of different ways. For me, what I did is I started with the lower incisors and the structure was composite. It made most sense. So I had a little putty based off of the wax up that I could use, and I could real quickly just do those front 6 and actually ended up being about 7 teeth to get a cusp tip on one of the premolars in through there. So put those composites in, and then as soon as those composites were in real quickly, I prepped the lower left preparations. And why did I do that? because I actually did this very digitally. And again, there's a whole other course that we'll be doing about digital dentistry, so I'm not going to spend too much time, but I want you to understand the process here because it's good for conversation and so you're not wondering the whole time. So I prepped the lower two, I scanned the preparations, and then I used the wax up as a biocopy. And then I verified the proposal so that it's stitched together, and then I actually, in this particular case, I milled provisionals. Because again, remember, she started with a lot of pain. We proved to ourselves that things could feel good on plastic. I still like to hedge my bets. So I still wanted, even though I'm using CAD/CAM dentistry, I wanted to confirm comfort on some plastic first. So I actually end up milling provisionals. And then while they were being milled, I prepped the lower right teeth. And so I prepped the lower right teeth, and I cemented the lower left, and then after I cemented the lower left, I scanned the lower right. And then I milled the provisionals, and then I cemented the lower right. So real predictably, I had the lower arch looking exactly as it was based off of our wax up, based off of aesthetics and function, right? And then on that same day, actually, I went and I prepared the upper left. I had some time. And then I scanned and milled the provisionals. Now, I'm going to go into detail in a minute just so I don't confuse you on how I scanned the upper teeth. But for right now, just know that I scanned those and put some provisionals in on this day and left the implant as it was. So that was the end of day one, actually, because we ran out of time. Now, think of how you would have started this treatment already. There's so many different ways, and you know what would work or wouldn't work because you had it on the models. You had a blueprint of where you were going. You could see all the different ways you could do it. Well, I knew she was coming back. The next day I started and I just prepared her upper anteriors, and then I scanned those in. And again, I want to quickly share with you how and why I scanned those in, because we had to use something in digital dentistry. We have to have data points to stitch everything together. And that model that I was wanting to use as a biocopy was so different from her dentition to start with that I just basically made a little putty on her model and then put a whole bunch of little data points in there, and I did it on the model first so that I scanned that in as the biocopy, so that now when I'm going to scan her preparations in, I take that same little putty that fits in her mouth just like it does on the model, and that's the beginning of grabbing the data points so that everything stitches together. So for those of you who are into this, I wanted to throw that out at you so that you'd know how that worked. But regardless, what I did is I now verified the proposal and stitched together that all those data points were good, and I milled provisionals. And I milled them in 2 sets of 3 again. So this is milled TelioCAD, and so I did 2 sets of 3. And while those were milling, I could actually come up and I could cut off and prepare the upper right. So the top ones were milling, I could cut and prepare the top right. And now I can cement the anterior provisionals at this point, and you see where they are right now. Now, I want to share something with you because you're looking at those right now going, interesting, Kev, what's up with that funky diastema and that sort of canted? And I was thinking the same thing. I'm like, how did that happen? And you know what's interesting is, I look at that wax up again, and that wax up has those exact same contours on the model. That's how accurate these putties are, or that's how accurate CAD/CAM dentistry is. It looked terrible in the mouth, and I went back and I thought, what was the mess up here, Mr. CAD/CAM? And actually, it's because it was so darn accurate. So as you'll see in a minute, I ended up going and changing that and putting some nice provisionals in. But I wanted to bring that to your point that, yeah, that's why those look like that. But regardless, the edges were still where they belong, and the function was great. And so now I could verify the proposal and biocopy stitching of the upper 3 on the top right and go ahead and start milling those. And while they were milling, because everything worked and stitched really well, while they were milling, I could go ahead, and I got nothing else to do right now, right? So I can go ahead and start checking to see exactly how the function is, again, rechecking the guidance and rechecking those stops on the bottom, on her bottom left. I shouldn't be surprised that things are looking really good, just like they were on the models. And so now I can come in and I can cement the upper left and then finish adjusting the occlusion. And I shouldn't be surprised that a starting point is really, really, really close to having all those stops that I had on the models. No surprises at all, because we started with aesthetics, function, structure, and biology, and there's no surprises as we go through here. And interestingly enough, all those stops in that guidance, what does it feel and look really similar to? The appliance that we started with way back at the beginning of treatment. We have created that same guidance, the same stops, that same situation. Now it's just on a different plastic. That's the neat thing about this. And so now we can give her a different plastic for a while and just verify that she stays really good. And she does. So what I did is I cemented and I finished adjusting the occlusion. So where we started from was our photographs, putting the edges where they were. We went to our models and worked out the function. And then we had our lab technician create a model that looks exactly like we want it to be. And then it actually looks exactly like that on the day we finish putting all these provisionals in. There shouldn't be any surprises. Predictability goes up amazingly, right? So we finished looking at function, going all the way to cuspid rise. And actually, yes, I had her back and I recontoured that little diastema spot, and I could just mill a whole new set of provisionals so that when she came in, they were ready. And now there should be no surprises. That as she moves from cuspid rise to crossover, cuspid rise to crossover, it's exactly as the models were. And in protrusive, it's exactly as the models were. There are no surprises at all. So now I could come in after a little bit of time making sure she feels good, and I could go ahead and mill all those lower teeth. I can put permanent restorations in on one day. So I bonded in the lower posterior restorations. They weren't quite perfect. Dentistry is not always perfect, but the dots were all in the right place. The adjustments were very, very minimal. This was the starting place, as you see right here, starting. So a few adjustments. And then a couple weeks later, I came in and I bonded the upper anterior restorations, her guiding teeth. So now I had her permanent guiders on the top, and I had those permanent guiders on the bottom that we made out of composite. What's interesting, though, and I thought I'd bring this to your attention, is as I put those permanent restorations in on the top, and they're crowns now, right? It was interesting. Those top teeth were hitting, the front teeth, were hitting harder than the back teeth. And I was like, crud, I've made a lot of adjustments and things have changed, but I really trust it because that was what I planned. And so as opposed to reducing the lower composites, because we put those where we wanted them in our head, and as opposed to grinding off the lingual of those upper crowns, because they were really what we decided we wanted based on something, I had lost just a smidge of that vertical. So what I did, because this is the beauty of trusting this process, is I put two leaves in there, so two leaves of a leaf gauge. I had her slide forward, back, and squeeze, created just a little bit of space between the back teeth, right where we wanted her to be. Plopped a little composite on those landing areas on the top provisionals, had her bite into it with the two leaves, and zap the composite. Now, does that look exactly like her appliance does? Does that look exactly like physiologic occlusion? Yeah, and it was predictable for me because I knew how we got there in the first place. So she was back to perfect again. So now I could just come in and do the posterior restorations. I placed all the maxillary posterior restorations, those 6, including the implant, and that was the starting point after I put everything in. Not a lot of adjustment to do. Dots in the right place. Isn't it interesting that they look exactly like they did on those models? The location is exactly like they were on the models that we did back from step 1. So now it's just time to refine the occlusion. So cuspid rise to crossover, cuspid rise to crossover, and end to end. It's exactly as we saw on the models from step 1. And so we just started from aesthetics. We looked at where her teeth were in her head, right? We put some edges there, looked how they looked in her smile, decided where we wanted lower teeth, and then we shouldn't be surprised where we end up. We can have a fun day where maybe she wears a little bit of lipstick and comes in, lip at rest. Look at what happens with that little bit of lip support. There's no surprise. We did it with our provisionals and we did it with some intention. Full smile, everything follows her lower lip great. Can spend some time taking some fun photos because it's a big deal. So we took some fun photos, and again, you can see the lip support that we created. The edges are in the right place in her head, and they function beautifully. Now, you can even take some different fun photos, and you can share them with the patient. You can put them in your book in your reception area, because you should be proud of this type of work. But yet, there's so many different ways to do it. So as far as the different ways to do it, I want to real quickly share with you that, of course, we could have spent a whole lot more time talking about the digital part of the treatment planning or using digital occlusion or the digital workflow. We could have spent so much more time talking about bite splint therapy, and we will. But for this case, I wanted really to focus on EFSB and really especially thinking about structure and biology and trusting that we would get there. So my learning for this case, I'll tell you, my learning, there's always something, right? My learning was to trust the process that I keep saying to you, but maybe allow myself to think ahead just a little bit, maybe just a little ambiguity. I'm not very good at that, but maybe a little ambiguity. See, I know the S is coming. So I could have remembered that the thin enamel on the lingual of her upper incisors, before I finished function so that I didn't have to go back and finish all that. But again, I trust the process. So even though I should have given myself a little more flexibility in getting to the S just to think about it a little bit, I love trusting the process. So, and you know what? When I changed it, the neat thing is it's not that big a deal. It reminded me it's not that big a deal because the dots are already there for you. And instead of going, oh my God, now what? You're like, it's okay. It's all there for you. That was the structured part of my learning. The biology part of my learning was to always include all specialists in the plan. You think to yourself, really sit down with an endodontist and a periodontist and surgeon and orthodontist with a CBCT and everything? Yes, go over the E, the F, the S, and the B with your specialist because you start to plan the soft tissue concerns or where the implant placement is with the surgeon or the periodontist. Because if they understand the E and the F and the S, they'll better have an understanding of what they're doing with the B, right? So all of our specialists really help me remember that that's an important part of this process. You're learning what I hope you got out of this, and I know we've gone fairly quickly going through her case, but my hope for you is that you trust the process more. You can trust the process. There can always be a lot of confusion at the beginning of treatment for any dentist and any patient in this situation. There was so much confusion with Shannon. We were overwhelmed with what was going on with her teeth. What do you do with the spaces? What do we do with the pain? Where do we start? As opposed to trust the process and go through it. And then get to the S and B when it's time. I know you're dying to get there because there's teeth missing and there's all these cool materials. Get the E and the F there first and then get to the S and the B. I hope that you got that out of this as well. And then finally, my hope for you is that you really have an appreciation for visualizing the end before you begin. Doing some of the work yourself on the models helps determine different ways, appropriate ways of phasing treatment, right? For instance, the upper left implant. How many different ways could we have done Shannon's upper left implant? When could I have taken the impression? When could I have actually placed the restoration? There was a time where I thought to myself, you know what, I don't want to wait for it to finish integrating. I'm ready to do the rest of the dentistry. I could have done everything else and then just plop that implant in last, couldn't I? Just that last little piece of the puzzle, even months and months after I was done. I had so many options for that. Did I want to put a provisional on there for the tissue? Did I want to take a separate impression for the implant? So what was the timing of the healing? By doing some of this yourself and working with your specialist really helps. And by the way, recession for the upper cuspid. We never got back to that for the biology. Well, I may have completely missed it if I wouldn't have trusted this process. And for her, it was actually, maybe you didn't even notice, we just covered it right up to the gum line because that seemed to be the appropriate thing for her. But we knew what we could have done, right, for that. So I hope that you've appreciated this learning. Don't forget you've got the resources there if you want to review it again. I've had a great time doing this study club module with you. I love doing it for you. And I look forward to seeing you at another study club module, and I hope you guys all have a phenomenal day. Thanks.